global participants on our webinar. We have participants from South America, from Africa, from South Asia. More than 40 guys have replied to our invitations and decided to take this webinar. In case they couldn't join for any reasons, they will have still access to the webinar afterwards. But those who are live on our webinar will have the opportunity to raise questions to our speakers. So let me go ahead to briefly introduce who we are. We are a global matching platform, as you might have already explored. And we match NGOs with volunteers via online projects. Why we have decided to conduct this webinar is that writing fundraising proposals is one of the most common projects that we have encountered on our platform. And we believe that you who were selected for this webinar have the skills to be proficient in fundraising, writing fundraising proposals. So you can leverage your skills such as social media, content writing, or research, and make some great impact for NGOs all around the world. And let me introduce our first speaker. His name is Anshul Kamath. He's currently based out of Mumbai in India, but he worked in UK for the Shell company. So he will give you a perspective from the corporate sphere, and he has experience in writing grant funding proposals. He will give you some hands-on manual how to create a compelling proposal that will be successful. And our second speaker is Riti. She's currently here in Hyderabad. She has more than 15 years of experience in social development sector. So she will give you another perspective from the grant writing in the social sector. She's currently working for Interest Curve Global as a proposal writer and editor. So guys, please enjoy the webinar. If you have any questions, you can throw it to the chat, and then we will ask the speakers to answer your questions. So I will give my voice to Anshul. Hello, Anshul.
Hey, Adela, thank you so much. Pleasure to be with everyone. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. Great. So while this loads up, right. So today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about, how do you actually write fundraising proposals? So I know this is an area that's coming up quite frequently on Chezuba's platform, in the sense NGOs are putting out these kind of projects and they want help with, volunteers. And of course you can volunteer from anywhere in the world, but one of their biggest pain points is, raising money either through grants or funds from different impact organizations. So today, hopefully what I'm going to do is give you a bit of an overview about what this world really looks like and a few tips in terms of, what types of projects you'll come across and how you can actually tackle that. All right, so before we begin, just a little bit about me and my background. As Adela said, I've had the fortune of, having a mix of good corporate roles. And most recently I worked at a startup, which actually was an impact startup and raised a lot of money through grant funding. And one of my roles over there was actually to manage some of these grant proposals, ensure that we were getting that money in on time, we were able to report, able to satisfy the grant organizations and so on. So while I'm not an expert on this, I do have some experience, and hopefully I will be able to share that with you. And just another caveat. I'm here not because I'm not an expert on grants, but I genuinely care about giving back to communities, and I'm a big fan of the work that Chezuba has been doing. So I've known about them since their start and really been a part of their journey from inception. So I'm really happy to be with you guys today to actually be doing this webinar for them. All right, so I'm going to be a little basic on this. Apologies to anyone who is, already knows this stuff, but hopefully it will be new information for a lot of y'all. So all of us, we keep hearing about these terms like private equity and venture capital. And essentially what this is a bunch of people with money who want to grow that money, right? So what they do is they would put it in opportunities where traditionally they're able to get more money. And they expect a rate of return to actually compensate for some risk, right? So if I'm investing in a traditional startup and I'm putting $1 million, I have a big risk associated with that. Maybe that startup is going to go bust. So when I exit, I expect a really big reward, right? So that is how traditional investing takes place. But we're fortunate actually to live in a world where there's also a lot of philanthropic investing or grant investments, right? And that is this end of the spectrum where profits are not the only motive. And it's really nice that more and more organizations today are actually setting aside a little money towards this entire spectrum, right? And what we have is three main buckets. At a completely, extreme end is this thing called grants, which is pure cash. So these are typically charitable grants for NGOs where if they like the work you're doing, or, let's take an example where there's an NGO in rural Africa that's providing state-of-the-art education to rural kids or rural families, right? And that involves giving them internet access in schools, tablets where they can access that content. Now, there's no way that, rural families in Africa are going to be able to pay for that. So essentially, in order to make that impact or to make that model slightly scalable, there are grants for these kind of organizations, right? Where they give, if they like your business model, if they see that impact, they're going to give you pure cash. So you can continue doing what you're doing. And then we have this bit, which is on venture philanthropy and impact investing. And this is a mix of cash and a little bit of, profit motive as well. But it's not like traditional investing where profit's the only motive. They would normally, really care about achieving that social impact as well. And what that means is, even if it means a less than market rate return, they're okay with it because their mission as a impact fund or a venture philanthropy fund is to balance that impact with profits. All right. So in a nutshell, this is typically what this spectrum of investment activities looks like. And again, when you're dealing with social impact organizations and NGOs, you will typically be dealing with this end of the spectrum over here, right? Now, this entire world of impact investing is really ballooning. So if I actually, I'm not able to hide this, but this 50 billion number is in 2009. So as of 2009, all over the world, there was about $50 billion in this space. And what we're seeing is, how it's grown exponentially. It's grown actually 10 times by 2014. And, in 2014, there was $500 billion of money just pouring into this space. And that's going to further double by 2020. Now, to give you a perspective, 1 trillion is probably bigger than the GDP of, almost every single nation in the world, barring maybe 10, right? So there's a lot of money now in this space. And what this will mean is that, there's a lot more opportunities for NGOs or impact organizations to get these funds. And obviously what that means for you guys is, NGOs are going to require more help. There's more opportunities to use your skills and contribute your skills towards, these kind of proposals and fundraising proposals and just these, these grant funding and everything else. So it's actually a really good time to start building some of these skills. And look, if there's NGOs you care about and they need help to access money, I think it's absolutely a great opportunity to use that and leverage some of those skills to be helping with some of these projects. Right. So speaking of these projects, there's typically 3 types of projects you'll come across. The first thing is identifying funders and organizations. Now, typically this will happen when, an NGO has never raised money before. So maybe an NGO is 6 months old, just to take an example. And, they've started working with a few villages, and maybe let's just take the same example of the NGO, the charitable organization in Africa, providing state-of-the-art education. And what they've started doing is they've started identifying certain schools they can partner with, and it's just not scalable, right? It's not a sustainable business model. So they need some subsidies, right? So their first thing is to actually identify who's going to help subsidize this. So I'll talk through this in a little more detail, but there's an entire world of funders out there, right? So we saw that today there's probably somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion in this space. Obviously, that's not going to be with one organization, right? So the first thing is identifying who are you actually going to look at to raise some of that money? Who are you going to approach? All right. The next type is going to be writing those fundraising proposals. And this is where it's really meaty, because this is the crux of it, right? Once you've identified those organizations, this is your make or break, right? If you don't write a good fundraising proposal, or you're not able to impress those organizations, you're not going to get the money. It's that simple, right? So you have to make them believe in it and write compelling proposals, which I'll talk a little bit about, and later Riti is also going to touch on this. And then the third bit is, once these grants or this money is in place, very often, we think it's free money, but this comes with strings attached, right? So typically what they would do is they would give you money over maybe a 2 or 3 year period. And they keep expecting regular reporting in terms of how that money is being used, what kind of impact is it actually achieving on the ground. And this is really important to continue getting more money from the same organization. So as an example, say you write a good fundraising proposal and you get $5 million. Typically what's going to happen is that they will give you $1 million to begin with. And then maybe over a 3 year time frame, they would give you $1 million every 6 months, just based on whether you're actually able to show some impact and utilize the money well, right? So these are the 3 main types of projects. And really, for early stage NGOs and for these social impact startups, it's really the first 2 stages where you'll actually see a lot more projects. So looking at the first type, which is identifying funders, right? The first thing is, where does this money actually come from? So there's amazing, huge amounts of money, close to $1 trillion. And as I said, it's bigger than the GDP of most countries in the world. So where is this actually coming from? I've tried to break it up into 4 main categories. The first one is corporate foundations. So there's a lot of large corporates now, which are actually, in order to be more socially responsible or just give back to society, they're actually setting aside funds for these corporate foundations, which will typically invest in impact activities. And normally these will be to the company or the sector they operate in. So as an example, we have Shell Foundation, which is an arm of the energy company Shell. And they would typically invest in a lot of access to energy companies in rural Africa and Asia, because they care about energy and just being, sustainable towards the natural resources. You have MasterCard Foundation as another example. And, MasterCard is a payment gateway. So they care about financial inclusion. So, if you're a fintech startup or a startup, improving the way farmers can access credit, then MasterCard Foundation would be really interested. The second is public sector funds. So, you have development funds that are normally linked to tax saving bonds. So for example, there's a large organization called USAID. And what they do is they give tax benefits to individuals and companies, and they would take that money and deploy it for development activities across the world. The third category is high net worth individuals and family funds. So, as people get richer and you have this top 1% that everyone talks about that, it's just getting so rich, they're also trying to now set aside some of their money for more sustainable investing. And finally, you have charitable trusts. So, just to look at some examples over here, charitable trusts could be the Aga Khan Foundation or Tata Trusts in India. We have these corporate foundations that I spoke about. You have the Gates Foundation, which is an example of a family fund. And then you have, USAID, which is an example of a public sector development fund. Now, this is a very small snapshot of all the charities, all the funds in this space. So there's hundreds, if not thousands out there. And this is just an example of a few companies that exist. All right, so now the big question is, what do you actually do when you're when you get a proposal? So you get a project, an NGO actually wants help. They need to raise some grant money or some impact investment, right, in order for them to actually sustain themselves or grow. And say you sign up for one of these volunteering projects to help them prepare that list of who to even approach. What would you actually consider in this project? So the first thing is, what type of funding are you actually looking for, right? So as we saw, there could be pure grant funding, which is pure cash. Are you looking for more philanthropy, or maybe a hybrid model where the NGO you're working with is willing to offer a share of the profits or some equity in order for that money? So the first thing is, what kind of funding are you looking for? Then it's about identifying the foundations or the organizations. So, in that list that we saw, like Shell Foundation, like USAID, who are you actually going to target, right? Now, the first thing to remember is that every foundation and organization actually has different focus areas. So just like that example I gave you where, Shell Foundation likes to focus on access to energy startups. So if you're a renewable energy startup in, say, Indonesia, Shell Foundation would maybe love to partner with you. If you're providing access to farmers in South America, then MasterCard will probably like to partner with you. So the first thing is to actually look at foundations and organizations that focus on your target area, right? That is really important. Now, where do you find that? Every organization has it on their website. They either have a manifesto or a mission statement where you can clearly understand what areas of impact they look at, right? Some of the other things that you can consider are, different impact funds like to get involved at different stages. A lot of the larger established funds like Shell Foundation, for example, they like to get involved once they see a proof of concept or a minimum team size. There is good legal incorporation. There is a strong, board of directors. So all this governance is in place. That's when some of these may, invest. You may have another fund which is purely for rural entrepreneurs starting out, right? So again, just as you have those impact areas, you also have these other categories or criterias that these funds would consider, right? So it's important to go through that and make sure that the NGO you're partnering with or the organization you're partnering with fits into those criteria, right? Couple of tips that we can look at is, firstly, where did similar companies or NGOs raise their funds from? So this will be a clear giveaway in terms of the types of organizations that are willing to invest. So if you're working for a company, an NGO in Africa, for example, if you look at other African NGOs in a similar situation or similar impact space, those funds clearly care about that area and that geography. So that's a good starting point. And again, when you're in doubt, just write to a fund, or call them up, and sometimes they're more than happy to chat, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes, but it saves you a lot of time and effort from doing some more research. Moving on to just writing proposals. Now, one of the things that we learn about today is that these proposals or these organizations tend to be really bureaucratic, and they have fixed ways of working. They have fixed proposal writing styles or guides, and unfortunately, if these are not followed pretty much to the T, sometimes you can have the best impact and the best model, but it's really hard to actually impress them and access those funds. So it's the unfortunate, but it is reality. So how do you get around that, right? Obviously, if you've identified a funding partner that you want to write a proposal to, the best thing is to call them up or just make sure you have a good copy of everything that they're looking for, right? So maybe their checklists or the kind of ways they measure proposals or look at proposals or judge proposals, right? So that goes without saying that it's important to do your research and just kind of speak to them when in doubt. But generally, what a good proposal will contain is obviously the overall business model, and starting with what's the problem actually being addressed, right? Who is the consumer? Who is benefiting from this? What are the products and services that are being offered? And of course, how does it create impact? How is this sustainable and scalable, right? Then the really important thing is, how does it actually fit in with this funding organization's impact areas and objectives, right? Because they have limited funds that they want to give away, and they want to make sure that they're able to, the funds that they're giving away, those organizations can actually make an impact. So it's really important to figure out whether this fits in with, or how this fits in with their objectives. Then the legal and financial structure. So, just all the paperwork in terms of the incorporation documents, obviously if it's an NGO or charity, exemptions, tax exemptions, who the board of directors are, who the advisors are, what the legal structure is. These are, important paperwork documents. And lastly, the financials. So normally, a good 3 to 5 year financial plan. And more importantly, it's about how this money that's being raised will actually be used, in order to, will it actually make a difference to the organization or not? That's what they want to see, right? And finally, sometimes they also care about who else has put money in this. If I am starting a rural social impact company tomorrow and I'm looking to raise funds, the people funding me also want to see, am I serious about this? Have I put my own money in this, right? Who else has put money in this? Because very often they could give money and, companies would not be well run, or they could shut down. So they like to do that due diligence like any good fund. And so these are some of the elements. At this stage, this is like hopefully a very quick overview. There's a lot of other aspects of this that I cannot cover in this short time, but hopefully this was a good help, and I'm happy to take any questions later in the webinar.
Thank you very much, Anshul. I think that was a really valuable perspective from the corporate world and from the perspective of the donors for the NGOs, which I think Riti will definitely nicely complement to look at the writing proposals from the NGOs perspective. So I will just hand it over to Riti to give us her presentation on how to cooperate with the NGOs if you are a volunteer, and what kind of expectation to have from the volunteering work, and how to communicate with the NGO. Hi, Riti.
Hi, thanks Adela. Thanks for introducing me. Hi guys. We're going to take the next few minutes to kind of understand what the social development sector is, and what it means to be a volunteer in the social sector, because it's a very sensitive area and a lot goes into it, a lot of perceptions, attitudes, realities that we may or may not be aware of. First, understanding what the social development sector really means. A lot of times we have very limited understanding of what the development sector might be. We would probably imagine it to be about hunger or about just poverty, but actually we have to kind of have a broader perspective to understand the sector. And it is more about inclusion, social inclusion. It is about disadvantaged circumstances. It is about violence. It is about powerlessness. Those are the issues that define the social development sector. Where volunteerism roots from is basically the awareness and the understanding that people get about the global inequalities and the injustice. Once we realize that we see it, we understand it, and we want to be part of making it better for communities across the world globally, and that's when we make the decision to become a volunteer. Once we take that decision, and once we have made up our mind that we want to be associated with a certain cause or causes anywhere in the world, then comes a very important aspect of understanding what it means to work with nonprofits, or what are the nuances of working with nonprofits, what are the realities that I might not be aware of. uh, because because we are becoming closer globally. Everybody is associated, working with people from different countries, different cultures. The first thing that we have to be aware of, that we have to be sensitive towards, are the cultural differences that we might come across while working with organizations. We come across situations, we come across projects, we come across interventions not that we might not be familiar with. But to understand the importance of the intervention, of the impact that it has in a particular culture and community, that is what makes us better volunteers for a nonprofit. And that brings me to the next point, that it's important to believe in the cause before you choose to be associated with. Because as writers, right now we're talking about proposal writing, and if we don't believe that the cause that we are going to be associated with actually has the kind of impact that the community needs, we won't be able to do justice to the proposal that we write for the nonprofit. And it's really important to be convinced of the impact that it has. um, Also, as volunteers, when we come into the sphere of a nonprofit, we bring in skills that the nonprofit might not have. But when we go in, we have to go in with the perspective that we are going to learn as much as the nonprofit may learn from our skill. Because the nonprofits, the NGOs, work with issues and ground realities that we might not be exposed to on a daily basis, or we might not even be aware of certain nuances of their working. So it's a learning process for both the nonprofit and for us, and that is something we need to keep in mind when we start uh, the process of volunteering. We need to go into it with no preconceived notions. We need to go in with a clear, open mind to take in whatever comes in our way. We're going to talk a little bit about the three main approaches of proposal writing for nonprofits. Usually, nonprofits write to government agencies and international aid organizations. They write to foundations, and they approach corporate for corporate grants. Talking a little bit about government agencies and international aid organizations, um, we have to really, when we tackle government agencies, it is a very academic paper almost, because there's a lot that goes into it in terms of research, in terms of data, statistics, citations, references. A lot of times these proposals go to 80, 100 pages, and it's really heavy. It has to be, the language has to be very academic. And Before we start writing the proposal, it is always good practice to make an outline of what the requirements are, what all we need, what all information we need to present, what all documents that have to be sent as attachments, because a lot of times the nonprofits might not have certain documents handy, and it is really good practice to get in touch with the nonprofit, make your outline, get in touch with the nonprofit, and let them know that these are the documents that we will require at the time of submission, so that they can get it ready. Um, Coming to foundations, usually when you write to foundations, they will have a letter of intent that they ask nonprofits to submit. It's a very short, 2 to 3 pages. Usually they have their own template. If they don't, it's basically sticking to 2 3 pages of what the problem is, how you intend addressing it, and how much it would cost, and what are the basics of the activities that you intend implementing. Once your letter of intent is accepted by the foundation, then they write back to you, asking you to write down the full proposal which you give for submission. At that stage, again, it is a matter of being accepted or not. So we should make sure that the main proposal also justifies every single question that they ask. A lot of times in most cases, foundations have a very strict word count policy. So you'll probably have to write the objectives or the activities in 120, 250 words or 300 words, and it becomes really difficult to showcase what you really want to do in that much of a limited word count. And it's essential then to write and rewrite and make sure that we don't lose our clarity while sticking to the expectation of the foundation, because they have their own guidelines. It is also good practice when you're writing for foundations to go through their website, to read their mission and their summary of what the foundation stands for, and use some phrases or words from their mission statement or from their summary in your proposal or in your letter of intent, because that catches their eye and it strikes a chord with them. Coming to corporate grants, definitely, to start off, one would say do not use academic language. Stick to very neutral tones. Also, if possible, write a bit like how the corporates write. And again, here it is really good practice to go to their website, read what they write, how they write, and try and use the same tone that they have used on their website or in their grant guidelines. Usually, if they do not have a template, stick to the 3 P's, as we call them. The first one is the problem statement. Be brief what the problem is. Don't get into too many statistics and data and cite references. Keep it short and sweet. Keep it concise. Go to the solution. Even if you have very detailed information about the nonprofits activities and intervention objectives, in the first submission to a corporate grant, keep it very concise what the solution is. And the third, of course, is the budget, how much it would cost. At this stage, when you first approach a corporate, you don't necessarily need to submit a full budget, but just give a short breakdown of what the cost would look like if they come in to fund the nonprofit. Of course, for corporate grants, if unless otherwise stated, a 2 to 3 page pager is ideal to approach them, because they usually wouldn't read more than that. Just a few takeaways. When you come in as a volunteer with a nonprofit, it's really important to understand what the organization stands for, what they intend, where the passion comes from, what their impact means in the community where they function. At this stage, also, when you're interacting with the organization, whether it's through email, whether it's through phone, it will be really useful for you to take down notes, whether you want to record the meetings or you want to take notes in your diary, because a lot of times when you're writing the proposal, you will get inputs for the proposal from these notes, because there'll be words, there'll be phrases, or suggestions that the nonprofit has spoken of in their conversation with you that you might forget otherwise, and it's really useful to include that in the proposal. Again, one of the most important things while working on a proposal is to, at the first instance, go to the guidelines of whichever agency it is, make the outline, and make sure that you get in touch with the nonprofit and tell them way well in advance to get documents in place that need to go as attachments. Make sure that you have an outline of what needs to be submitted, because a lot of times information is missing and you need to go back and forth with the nonprofit. As part of a proposal writer's role with a nonprofit, it is you should make it a practice to also suggest a cover letter to the nonprofit, because any proposal you send, you have to send a cover letter, and many times the nonprofit might not know how to word that. So it's good practice to just send um, uh, a verbiage for them to know how to write it. They can use exactly what you have written, or they can use that as a reference. A lot of times proposals have style guides that you need to stick to. and it is essential, very, very essential, that we follow that to the T, because many times the agency will not entertain proposals that do not abide by the style guide or by the guidelines that they have. So a lot of time, as content writers, we do follow, either it is Oxford style, or you have the Chicago manual, or the MLA, or the APA manual. And it is important, if the agency requires us to follow a particular style guide, or follow a particular style of writing, or a set of guidelines within the proposal, you should ensure that each guideline is ticked off when you're writing. um, I think that covers what I wanted to talk about. If you guys have any questions, you can let Adala know. We'll go into questions a little later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Riti. Thank you very much for really hands-on experience. I believe that our participants can use everything what you have presented to be more confident in picking up fundraising proposal projects on our website. So thanks a lot for that. And in the meanwhile, while we prepare the questions from the volunteers who are with us, please feel free to use our chat box. So our admin will share the questions with Riti and Anshu, and they will prepare answers for you. And in the meanwhile, you can explore our website, chezuba.net. And we have several projects which are on fundraising proposal writing and which haven't been matched yet. They are either from India or from African countries. You can go through the projects, and if you have any questions or doubts while reading the projects, you can still refer to Riti and Anshu. You have still a few minutes to contact with them. On our website, you can also see information about the NGOs. If you click on the About NGO tab, and then you can explore the NGO website, so you can make sure that you will work with an NGO which cares for the people that you are also having passion for. If you have any more questions also for Chezuba, how our website works, don't hesitate to ping us anytime. And I will just check whether we have prepared the questions for Riti and Anshu.
Hey everyone, so there is a question which is, how quickly can you expect a foundation to get back to you on whether or not your grant proposal has been accepted? So that was a question. The answer to that is, it depends from organization to organization, but all of these organizations, and for good reasons, right? Because they're dispersing some money. Typically large amounts of money, maybe upwards of $100,000. So all of this takes a lot of due diligence and a lot of vetting of different corporate documents, different governance, legal, financial documents, your plan. And the other thing is, what they normally do is they have investment committees. So typically they would aggregate maybe 5 to 10 proposals, and before they actually decided, they have their own investment committees of maybe a couple of external experts, the head of the fund, and together they would take a decision. So typically these investment committees would maybe take place once a month or even once a quarter. So that final decision is obviously based on the timing of those investment committees. And even internally, just to go through documents and stuff, it takes anywhere between 2 to 3 months normally. So this is, we're playing with money over here, money that people care about, money that has an opportunity cost. So these things do take time. And you will get updated throughout the process. So typically it's not just a yes or no decision. There'll be a lot of follow-ups and a lot of different stage gates before the final acceptance. So hopefully that answers this. Okay, so there's another one, which is there a particular timeline to start writing for proposals? Okay, so the caveat here is I'm not, a complete expert on this. I've dealt with few organizations in this space, and there is no right or wrong timeline for those particular organizations. Typically, as I said, there will be, these are subject to a lot of investment committees. So it's probably worth just reaching out to them in advance, and maybe just just drop them an email or just pick up the phone and ask them that. Because I can imagine it's going to be different for different organizations. All right.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anshul, for answering the questions. And now, Riti, did you receive any questions to be answered from the volunteers?
Not yet. We can wait a few minutes if anybody has any questions. What is the minimum limit for grants is a question. A minimum limit in terms of word limit or cost? Is that the question? Because it's a little okay. So usually at the agency whom you're writing to would tell you what their grant space is. They'll say we fund 1 million, 500,000 to 1 million or whatever, and you can write within that space. So they will always mention in their guideline what their budget is like, and it is ideal to write the budget within that limit. So you'll always have that in their guidelines. Can you share some good samples or examples of good proposals? Samples, unfortunately, I can't share here, but I think a good proposal. There are a lot of blogs online now. When I started as a proposal writer, there weren't any blogs, but nowadays there are a lot of good blogs. You just have to go to Google and type best practice for proposal writing. I think those are the ideal keywords to use. Best practice for proposal writing, grant writing, those keywords, if you use in Google, it will be quite helpful and you'll be able to find the right answers. Another question. Yeah, I think that's it. That's the end of it. Back to you, Adela. Okay, so another question has come up. Can you share how to communicate with NGOs from other countries? Actually, it's the best question you can ask as a volunteer, because you come across such different people and cultures, and my practice has been that when you interact with organizations that are outside of your culture or your community or your country, you have to be sensitive towards them, towards their culture and where they come from. And for that, you need to really read about where they are from, what they do, what is their culture like, how do they interact with people, and imbibe that in your interaction with the organization. We have to understand that even if we are bringing professional skills to NGOs, they are still, any NGO you work with, they are basically very humanistic. They are not technical. They are not, they're not mechanical in their interaction. At heart, they will always be very humanistic, and they'll expect that kind of interaction with anybody who works with them. I think we should always keep that in mind and respect their culture. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Riti. I'm sorry for the little delay, but I had to be unmuted by our admin, which takes a few seconds. So thank you very much, Riti and Anshul, for your really precious time and precious knowledge and experience that you have shared with us today. So I just repeat that our video will be online on YouTube within 24 hours. I will share the link with all the participants, also with those who have registered for this webinar. I couldn't make it for either the time difference, because we have really really international crowd who registered for this webinar. So I understand that some of them couldn't make it live. But hopefully they will enjoy your presentations through the channel that we will share. And to close it down, I would like to wish everyone to enjoy your volunteering experience with Chezuba. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I just share my contact details in case you will have any feedback regarding Chezuba, or regarding volunteering, online volunteering on our platform, or regarding this webinar. Please feel free to ping me anytime. So thank you everyone for your time once again, and see you next time.